Last week we looked at the journey to the manger, the mystery, as we looked at how in Genesis chapter 3, how that sin came in and the serpent was there and what happened. Then we briefly touched on the Passover lamb and then kind of went into the New Testament looking at the message that was given to Mary and saw those beginning instances and how we're trying to now connect the dots just a little bit to try and put some big context into this whole thing of the manger. And that's why we're calling this whole little Christmas series, The Journey to the Manger. Today, looking at the mystery prophesied. The mystery prophesied. Now, I know we just got done singing We Three Kings of Orient Are. Bearing gifts, we do what? Travel afar. I think actually the word is Travis. I'm not sure if it's Travis or travel or whatever. Travel afar. Field and fountain, moor and mountain, following that star. Now, we are getting that. Please don't be upset with me. Don't be upset. Hopefully all the tomatoes have been confiscated as you came in, and there'll be no tomato throwing today. And just a little bit, we're going to have to try and break down that song just a little bit. I'm not trying to upset anyone. I know sometimes traditional Christmas songs can be very precious to people, and that song is precious to me. But what's very important is what God's Word says, and that's what we need to highlight. Now, this thing of Mary, we can understand. Okay, we can understand this young girl, and we can even understand the message from the angel named Gabriel to Mary. We can kind of get that. We can understand the shepherds as they're informed of this incredible miracle that's happened and the rejoicing. We get that. We understand that. And even the innkeepers, how that they had gone to where? Bethlehem, knocking on all the, there was a travel in, no place there. There's the Hampton, whatever, nothing there. And there was a little independent one down the road. They're the only one that had a little bit of something. We can understand the innkeeper. However, today we want to think about probably the most mysterious players in this whole Nativity. We want to think just for a little bit and wonder just for a little bit about these folk that we call the Magi. The Magi. Now, I'm going to argue, when I say argue, and I mean fight, suggest to you, maybe that's the word, suggest to you that these probably weren't even kings. Probably not kings. So, what we're going to do, we're just going to try and take the first little bit, and we're going to offer you something I'm going to call fiction versus nonfiction. Okay? Fiction versus nonfiction. And we want to try and pick out some things, for example, on the fiction side that we don't know. And what is fiction, by the way? What is fiction? Made-up story. A made-up story, okay? Do you like it? Is there anything wrong with fiction? Nothing wrong with it, okay? Nothing wrong with it. Made-up stories. However, let's consider that particular song compared to Scripture. And we want to read this portion from Matthew chapter 12. And this is the only place in the Bible where we see these chappies appear. And let's see what it says. Let's see what it says. Matthew chapter 2, not 12. Did I say 12? Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Here we go. Bible says this. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east. Lots of mysterious things there, by the way. We have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Why? Because Herod was always afraid that someone was going to take his job. Okay, he was a piece of work, by the way. If you want to check into Herod, he was a piece of work. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. You know where to get the information, by the way. Isn't that interesting? And so they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it's written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least amongst the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he had sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. A lie. And when they heard the king, they departed. And behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. When they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Interesting. Now, I'm going to ask you to try and, for your best, really tune in today. Really tune in. We're going to have to travel back in time a bit to the Old Testament and to Daniel particularly, and we'll come to that in just a few minutes. We're going to have to try and kind of think through and work through a couple of things to see how and who these people could possibly be. So we're thinking a bit of fiction versus nonfiction. First of all, a bit of fiction, things we just don't know. For example, although the song says 3, and traditionally we think of 3, and actually if you look in tradition, they actually have names. However, from a biblical perspective, do we know how many there were? We don't. We do know that there were 3 gifts, that of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So we do know there are 3 gifts. Whether the gold was so heavy that it took a half a dozen of them to carry it, we don't know. We don't know. So that's one of the things we don't know, how many of them there were. We don't even know where they are from, what country they came from, what passport they needed to carry, right? The only thing that we do know is that they were from the east. And that's all that we know. That's all that we know. We don't even know how they came to follow the star, really. We don't know. Although at that time in the world, it was a thing. It was a thing. When certain celestial things happen in the sky, that there was an understanding that something special was happening. Okay? So that was a thing. And we're going to discover that these particular people, that was their hobby. That was their emphasis, to study the stars, to study these celestial bodies, of which certainly there's not tremendous amounts of knowledge, nothing like we have today, but there is tremendous interest in all that was happening up in the sky. We don't know that when and how old Jesus was when they came to visit him. Now, this is a big point of angst, I guess. And how many nativities, right? There's all the characters. There's Mary and Joseph and the star and the donkeys and all these kind of things. And lo and behold, who comes in but the 3 wise blokes, okay? Now, if you look at it from a biblical perspective, in verse 11 says that there was a young child with Mary. Where were they? They weren't in a stable. They were in a house. A house. And then as you look, and Herod, as he had found out that the Magi, the wise men, had evaded him, he then, in verse 16, says that he had all those in the Bethlehem area, all those boys killed who were how old? 2 years old and under. So it's possible that Jesus may have been 2 years old by the time the Magi arrived. Now, the problem with the nativities is if you were to do it in proper time, then no one's going to be sat for 2 years waiting for these wise men to come. Yeah, that's just the reality. However, it is an interesting perspective how that from the time that these Magi, these people, start to notice this celestial body, this thing, this whatever it was in the sky, this star as the Bible calls it, that they were following this, and it's possible, as Herod talked to the religious leaders, talking about when the star appeared and all these kind of timings, that he had all the boys killed from 2 years old and under. All the things that we aren't sure of, that we don't know for sure. However, there are some things that are nonfiction. The things that we do know. The things that we do know. For example, we do know the three gifts. And there is significance associated with each of those three gifts. And there's some debate on this, but I think we can actually say of those three gifts, there's some meaning to them. It just wasn't, they popped out to Asda, and they said, oh, blimey, we're going to be there in 5 minutes, and we don't have anything. What are we going to get? And they just picked the first thing that they saw. That wasn't the way it was. They brought gold, and gold would have been a sign, a symbol for what? As a king, a royalty, absolutely. They brought frankincense, which would have represented an incense that would belong to those who are priests, those who would have represented God. Oddly enough, if you look into some of the research, and I did a little bit of poking around, that frankincense is meant to be good and helpful for arthritis. Who would have thought? Then there was the myrrh. The myrrh. And if you look in the Bible, there's a couple of accounts where myrrh was used to help embalm bodies. So the myrrh would have been symbolic of the death of Jesus. Isn't that interesting? 3 perspectives of Jesus' life. That of a king, that of a ultimate priest, obviously representing us to God, and looking forward to his death on the cross. Oddly enough, looking into a bit of modern day research, they actually have discovered that it appears that myrrh has some anti-cancer elements to it as well. Isn't that interesting? The 3 gifts. So that's what we do know. We do know that they are from the east. Where in the east, we don't know. That is interesting to think. We do know that they are called wise. And we're going to take a look at that in a bit more detail here in just a few minutes. They were probably priestly astrologers, people who were of that part of the world who studied the sky, who looked for things and noticed something special and decided to make a trip. And the question that we want to think about is, why would they make the trip? And why would they go in that direction? Was it this star that was moving? Was it a star that was set? We don't know a lot of those kind of details, but we're going to take a look at a possibility. And we're going to wonder. We're going to wonder. As I said in the very beginning, and I'll hold my stance on this, these wise men were probably cloaked in more mystery than anything else in the whole of the Nativity. Now we're taking the miracle of the virgin birth. I mean, that's a mystery for sure, but we can kind of get that. But we just don't know much about these wise men. So the bottom line is this: there are very few certainties surrounding these wise men. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to ask you to buckle in and travel with me back hundreds of years. We're going to go back into the time of Mr. Daniel, if that's okay. We're going to go back into Daniel, and we're going to do something I'm going to call an I wonder kind of journey. Daniel is a fascinating character in the Old Testament, please. Old Testament, book of Daniel. Okay. The book of Daniel. And we're going to take a look at a few bits in his life. And what we're going to try and do as best we can. And I need you to ask you to be patient with me. We're going to try and connect some of the dots. And I'm going to ask you to wonder, not W-A-N-D, although we may do a little bit of wandering. We're going to wonder, W-O-N-D-E-R, just a little bit today, about Daniel's story and about how some of these bits may connect. Now, if I shout out the name to you, Daniel, if you've been in church any amount of time and maybe read some stuff, what would you connect Daniel with? Almost a lion's den. Daniel and the lion. That kind of rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? Daniel and the lion's den. Anything else about Daniel that you know of? That you know? He certainly loved God. He prayed. As a matter of fact, we're going to touch on that in just a short bit. But let's think about Daniel's story. Now, we're going to look at Daniel chapter 1. And we're going to kind of skip through just a little bit. I'm going to ask you to follow along with me as best you can. But we'll look at Daniel chapter 1, reading just the first couple of verses. We're going to look at a part of his story I'm going to call the captivity. The captivity. And we'll try to fill in the blanks. We'll try to help you to get a quick understanding, because one time, a few years ago, in church, we actually went through a broad overview of the Bible, looking at big events. And one of the events was very much part of Daniel's story. It says, in chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, says this. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, apologize for all the confusing names, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So Nebuchadnezzar, king of where? Babylon. By the way, where is Babylon? Babylon is in current day Iraq, not too far from Baghdad. You remember Baghdad of the Iraqi war? Okay. Around that area, that is what would be current day Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. He had gone to Jerusalem and besieged it. So that means they had surrounded it with an army, and they just waited him out, as you do. That's one of the tactics of war. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. So if you remember, and for those who are with us, you have to wind the clock way back, that there was a time when this king of Babylon had gone and had brought out from Jerusalem captives. Almost like what happened with, Hamas and Israel. Okay? They had taken people captive and brought them back to Babylon. Daniel was one of them. And that's going to play a key part in what is going to be happening with Daniel. And what the interesting thing is, or one of the interesting things, is that we could say, well, blimey, Daniel was taken from his home. That's for everything he was used to. He liked the food there. His friends were there. His family was there. Here comes dear old Nebuchadnezzar and rips him away from his home. And certainly God must be frustrated. Because the only way God can use people is when everything is nice and flowery and pleasant, right? No. God can do things even when stuff is difficult. Even when life is difficult and challenging, just like what it was with Daniel. Now, if you remember what happened, the king had said, we want to choose out some of these special lads that we notice to be able to, how can we say, bring them into our culture. Some of those who had special abilities, as we notice, we want to bring them in. We want to give them special food. We want to give them special training. We want them to be able to live as we live, to incorporate them into the culture those who are a special sort of Jewish nobility. However, if you remember, flipping down now to chapter 1, verse 18, if you remember, Daniel said, no, wait a minute, no, we don't want to eat this stuff. This is the king's food. And he told the man who was taking care of them, he said, listen, if you'll just bring us some good old English fish and chips and a bit of mushy peas and not black pudding, though, I'm sorry. There's no black pudding there. No, I'm messing. Daniel said, just give us a vegetarian diet, basically is what he said. All we want to have is vegetables, and we don't want to have any of the king's wine. We don't want to have any of the king's delicacies. He said, if you'll just give us a few days to test it out, and come and check us out and see what you think. And he said, okay, let's see what happens. Chapter 1, verse 18. It says, now at the end of those days, when the king had said that they should brought them out, that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them before King Nebuchadnezzar. And then the king interviewed them. And among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. And all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them not just equal, but what? 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in his realm. So Daniel impressed the king. He was on a good road. He was on his way to be successful, but more importantly, he was in the place for God to use him in an incredible, powerful way. I wonder, is God setting Daniel up to be somehow involved in the Nativity? I wonder. But then we need to move along a little bit into Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now this word gets a bit strange if you've not read this before. Let's read together. We're going to hop, skip, and jump just a little bit. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And this dream was very frightening to him. Reading in chapter 2. We're going to read verse 31 in just a couple minutes. We're going to let me set the stage. The king had this dream, and he called all the wise men, they call them the magicians, and we're not talking about the ones that pull the rabbits out of the hat. That's not the idea, okay? Those who claim to be wise, those who claim to be able to have knowledge and all these kind of things. Nebuchadnezzar called them all in and said, listen, I had a dream. I need you to tell me what this dream meant because I'm really confused. It's bothering me. And they said, oh, king, tell us the dream. We'll tell you what it means. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? And the king said, hold on now. If you're really who you say you are, what's that? You should be able to tell me not just what it means, but tell me the dream itself. And then if you can tell me the dream, my money is on you that you can tell me what it means. And he said, well, we can't do that. And the king said, okay, off with their heads, as the king had power to do. Word got around. Someone came up to Daniel's door. Daniel, it's time to go visit the special bloke down in the dungeon. What's going off? He was told the story. Daniel said, God is the one who is the revealer of dreams. Give me a little bit of time. Daniel went, prayed. God revealed to Daniel not just the interpretation, but the dream itself. Daniel was called in before Nebuchadnezzar, and let's see what a few of the bits were happening here. Chapter 2, verse 31. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who make known the interpretations to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Daniel says, The reason you have this dream is so that you can know what's going on inside your heart. Verse 31. Okay, that was verse 30. You, O king, were watching. And behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you. And its form was awesome. Its head was of fine gold. Check out this image. Its head was fine gold. Its chest and its arms of silver. Its belly and thighs of bronze. Wouldn't you like to weigh that in? That'd be nice. Its legs of iron and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image of its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. What a strange thing. What a strange thing. Daniel said, King, you had this image presented to you in this dream. Head was made of gold, chest and arms of silver, and it went down, and the further you got on down, the more rubbish the material was. That's strange. Let's skip down to verse 37. You, O king, given the interpretation now, the understanding. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And whatever the children of men dwell or beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. I'll bet he felt good about that. But, he's not going to like this bit. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Interesting. Skip down now a couple verses to verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face because he fell asleep? No. Daniel had given him a word for word, a image for image explanation of not just the dream, but what the dream meant. He fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and an incense to him, which Daniel, I'm sure, wouldn't have any of. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods. That's what the important point is. Your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Notice what happened then. The king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Now, here's what's interesting. From where Jerusalem is, from where Bethlehem is, oddly enough, Babylon is to the east. Now, I'm not putting hand on Bibles, hand up in the air. I can't do that. I'm just wondering. But not only that, I want to offer you a suggestion. There's a group of people that are called the Chaldeans. Now we have to go back, chapter 2, verse 2, reading in verse 1 as well. It says, now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. We know that already now. And his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Verse 2 now. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, these various groups of people, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell him his dreams. Eric, what are the Chaldeans? There's sort of two groups of them. One was an ethnic kind of group, a people, but then there was a special group of them. These were called the Magi, the wise people. Okay? Of, where were they from? The east. I wonder. Daniel was then chosen as the chief of the Magi. The word we have now, Magi. So now, let's just tie this all together. I know there was a lot of reading. There was a strange dream. Here is Daniel, this place of Babylon, taken as a prisoner during the siege by Nebuchadnezzar, living in a home that did not have fish and chips, did not have mushy peas. He could have very easily cried out, but Daniel was used greatly of God. Now, we didn't even get to the lion's den and all those other kind of things, how David was a man of prayer, but he was truly a man of God. Daniel was able to interpret this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And Daniel was elevated to the position of the chief of the Magi, of the Chaldeans, which is another name, all meaning the same things. So here's a few things that we can wonder about this Christmas time. Number one, things for us to wonder about. Number one, Daniel spent a significant time in Babylon. And during that time, Daniel must have had, Daniel had all these things. He had this vision of an interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And this was all dealing with things and kingdoms that were going to happen later on down the road. And we didn't get into it, but there's also a discussion and part of the dream talking about how that Messiah would come and he would be cut off, and the timing of these sorts of things. And we're talking about some things that were dealing with the prophecy in Israel, the prophecy of the Messiah, the Christ who is to come. And Daniel was privy. He was made aware of all these things. He received the prophecy about the various kingdoms, the future times, and the coming of Messiah. But not only that, not only just was he aware of all these things, but Daniel was then chief of the magicians, chief of the Magi, associated with astrology, studying of the stars. So here's my suggestion. Here's what I wonder. Is it possible that these Magi, these however many there were, as they brought these gifts, all started back with our friend Daniel, hundreds and hundreds of years? And maybe the story of Daniel and what his words were passed along within this class of people that we know as the Magi, the Chaldeans. This message was passed along saying that there's going to be a special event up in the sky around this time, as David gave all the various understandings of this image, and that at this time of years that he was given, that there's going to be something special. You need to be watching. And maybe there is a certain generation of Magi that received this message. And all of a sudden, as they considered the time in history where they were living, and they saw this star, this sign up in the sky, they thought, aha, maybe we're the ones. And that's when they booked their ticket, got their passport ready, packed the camels up, kissed the wife goodbye maybe, or maybe the wife traveled with them, we don't know, on this caravan, traveling down who knows how many miles to find the King of Kings. I don't know. I wonder. I've always been fascinated by the Magi. And just as we've said before with many things in the Bible, how can Jesus be God and man come together? I don't know. And as I've been talking with Russell in our little Tuesday meetings, I pull out my little Deuteronomy 29 card. Is that there's mysterious things that only belong to God, the things that we can understand belong to us. I think these are maybe some of the things, some of the mysteries that belong to God. Maybe one day we'll fully understand. But right now, let's appreciate the mystery of the manger, the mystery prophesied in our journey to the manger 2023.